So I've got an exciting video for you guys today where I'm going to be reacting to my Google coding interview. So back in December of 2019, I filmed this video with my friend Clement. Now, Clement is an ex-Google engineer. He worked there for about 2 years, and at the time I reached out to him and I said, hey, I'm currently preparing for interviews at Microsoft, Shopify, and a bunch of other large tech companies. Would you mind conducting a mock Google coding interview with me? We can film it, you can post it to your YouTube channel, and will it be some great practice for myself? Of course, Clement agreed to this, and he went ahead and we filmed this coding interview. So just to give you some context here, at the time of filming this video, I was in my second year of university. I had never done a coding interview before other than one phone screen, which wasn't really like a proper coding interview. And while I was extremely nervous for this video, I had been preparing for the past few weeks, even just for this video, by answering about 40 or 50 questions on the Algo Expert platform. In case any of you are wondering what that is, Clement runs this awesome business. It's called Algo Expert. Essentially, it's an interview prep platform, and it's what I actually ended up using pretty much solely for my preparation for my Microsoft and Shopify interviews, which I ended up passing. So if you guys do want to check that out, I do have a discount code. It's Tech with Tim. You can get 10% off. I'll leave the link in the description. But anyways, I was using his platform and he had told me before the video, hey, if you want to prepare for this, practice doing easy, medium, and hard questions. So I did about 50 questions between those three categories, most of them being in the medium and hard category. And just so you're aware, Algo Expert has a very hard and extremely hard category as well. So I was kind of doing, middle of the pack questions, what you would commonly get. So of course, I get to the interview, and what does Clement do? He gives me a very hard question to answer. So immediately, I'm a little nervous. I'm like, okay, I've never done anything at this rated difficulty before, but let's give it a shot and let's see how it goes. So anyways, that's all I kind of want to talk about and spoil before we get into this interview. My reaction aspect of this is going to be me just kind of popping in every few minutes and talking about how I'm feeling in a specific situation. If I did something wrong, if I feel like I maybe did something well, just kind of giving you guys maybe my thoughts on the interview, but I will kind of let it play most of the time just so that I'm not interrupting constantly and you guys can actually enjoy it if you haven't seen the original video. So anyways, with that being said, let's get started and get into the Google coding interview. All right, so I'm on the computer. I'm about to start the interview. I'm going to leave it for a few minutes just so you guys can hear the question. You can see kind of what's going on. And then as soon as there's some silence or I make a mistake or something like that happens, I'll kind of jump in, discuss that a little bit, and then we'll move on. All right, so enjoy.
Awesome. All right, so Tim, when we tried to get this to happen, this mock coding interview, we naturally had to put something on the calendar, right? We had to find a time that worked for both of us and give ourselves 45 minutes or an hour to make sure that we had enough time to record this. So I want you to write an algorithm that is going to basically take two people's calendars, you can imagine Google calendars, and it's going to basically return free slots of time during which these two people could have a meeting. Now here I'm going to add a few other things to make sure that we're really on the same page here. You can imagine that our calendars are going to basically be in the format of starting, like they're going to be lists of tuples or lists of length 2. So it's going to be something like, one calendar would look like this, where it might be noon to, let's say 1 p.m. Then it might be 3 p.m. to 4:30 p.m. Something like that. And it would actually be in military time. So it would be 15 to 16:30. Yeah, exactly. Okay. And so this would be one calendar, maybe mine. This means that I have meetings between noon and 1, between 3 and 4:30. I'm going to give you a second calendar, which is going to be your calendar. And then I'm also going to give you some daily bounds, because you can imagine that you might not want to have meetings before, let's say, 8 a.m. Or you might not want to have meetings after, let's say, 6 p.m. So I'll also give you something like daily bounds equals, let's say, 8 a.m., and let's say 6 p.m., which would be 18. So this means that you not only have these meetings here, but you also don't want to schedule meetings before 8 or after 6 p.m. Okay?
Okay.
So given... given two calendars and two daily bounds, and I'll give you a sample input in a second, and a meeting duration. So in our example, we need about an hour for this interview, but the meeting duration could be any duration. I want you to return a list of availabilities during which we could schedule our meeting. So here's an example, and then feel free to ask me anything you want.
Okay. All right. Okay. So sorry, I'm just looking at that now. I thought you were actually going to continue. That's why I was silent.
No problem.
Okay. Yeah. So can we assume that any time you give me for a meeting is within the bounds you gave me?
What do you mean by that?
So for example, say you person one says they have a meeting for they only want to book meetings from 9 a.m. till, in this case, I guess we'll say 8 p.m.
Yep.
Then all the meetings you give me will be within those bounds, right? There'll be no meeting that starts at 8:30 or 8:45 or something. Okay.
Yes.
And they'll be all we can assume all valid input, right? And these are so these are strings. That's interesting as well. Okay.
Yep. They're all valid inputs. Okay. They're all strings, and they're all in military time. So
okay.
3 p.m. is 15.
And so it looks like these are sorted right now. I'm going to assume they're not necessarily sorted.
No, you actually can assume that they are sorted. You can almost imagine that, when you open your Google Calendar, you kind of see the meetings in sorted order, in descending order from the beginning of the day to the end. You can imagine that that's the order they're going to be given in.
Okay. And last thing here. So, for example, if we're saying, I'm looking at input to all highlighted, so you can see here. 10 to 11:30. So then 11:30 is the end, 12:30 is the start. So I can obviously say that I could have a meeting from 11:30 to 12:30, right? That would be, I know this says 30, but that would be valid, 11:30 to 12:30.
11:30 to 11:30 to 12:30 would indeed be a valid block during which you could schedule a 30-minute meeting. But because at the top here, you have this person, or in this case, let's say me, who has a 12 p.m. meeting, as you can see in the answer, the block that we would be able to schedule would only be until 12.
Okay. So obviously that makes sense. But I was just trying to figure out, if the meeting ends at 11:30, the next meeting can start at 11:30, and then if the meeting ends at 12:30, the next meeting can start at 12:30, so I don't have to do 12:31 or something like that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so I think my initial kind of idea here is I'm going to look at one person's calendar to... All right, so I'm going to pause it for 1 second and quickly just talk to you about what I actually just did in case some of you don't realize why I did that. The first thing that I always try to do in coding interviews, and what I've kind of learned, is that you always want to, even if you completely understand the problem, ask a ton of questions. So I was literally sitting there trying to think of every question I could ask that would tell them that, I'm thinking about the ambiguity in this problem and trying to get everything down as specific as possible so I don't start solving the problem before I completely understand it. So that's why I asked, maybe potentially some silly questions just to make sure I'm clarifying everything and make sure that I really understand that, okay, first of all, these are strings. I don't have to start at, say, 11:31. I can start at 11:30. Oh, am I going to get valid input? Is there going to be stuff that I have to look for in terms of edge cases? That's kind of where I'm starting from, and that's why I went through that. So anyways, let's continue and let's see what I do next. I'm going to look at one person's calendar to start, and I actually only really care about the end times because the start time, obviously I can't start and so actually I do care about the start times, but the end times are what I want to start by looking at. So essentially I'll look at the end time 11:30, and then I'll look at the next start time and say, okay, if there is enough time within that block for whatever this meeting duration is. So in this case, when I'm looking at 11:30 and I'm looking at 12:30, I know I have an hour. So that's an hour of free time that I could technically book a meeting. So what I would want to do then is check in the other person's calendar if they have time available between 11:30 and 12:30.
Yes.
So in this instance, what I would do is say, okay, so between 11:30, I'll add 30 to that. If I can book something in that time, so between 11:30 and 12, that's valid. Because that's kind of the naive approach, I think, to do that. Now, because this is sorted, I feel like I could search in this a more effective way to find whether they have a valid meeting time. Right now, I'm just kind of talking out loud, trying to explore the problem for myself and get an idea of how I want to do this. Okay. So I think that initial approach is going to be to look in one person's meeting. This will be kind of my step one of the algorithm, and figure out essentially all the spare times that they have. Because if I can figure out the spare blocks of times they have, that's step one. That's going to help me towards the final solution, which is then just comparing those spare blocks of time to this next person's input. So how do I figure out the spare blocks of time? Well, I look at the ending time of one block, and I look at the starting time of the next block, and then essentially, if I have time in between that, then I can make another list and say, okay, so I have an availability in this person's schedule between 11:30 and 12:30. Then I could go continually. So here, 4:30. Okay, so there's no time here. So now I'm going to look at the end block here, which is 15, the start block here, which is 16. That means I now have an hour available there. So between 15 and 16, I could book a meeting. Then I'll look at 17. And when I actually get to the end block here, what I can say is, well, that will go to whatever our bound is. So in this case, 18:30, I technically would have availability from 17 o'clock until 18:30 because that's the bound that you gave me there. And then same thing here at the front, I could treat this as the end time of, say, another block and say, okay, well, from 10 to 10, well, obviously I can't do anything there because that's the bound. Okay, so once I can do that aspect, then what I need to do is compare it to this block here. So if I have, and I'm just gonna write some lists down here.
Yeah.
So let's say I can generate my lists that look like 11:30. So I have an availability I know in person 2 schedule, and I guess it doesn't really matter which person I do this for, but let's just do person 2 for now. At 11:30 to 12:30, I don't have anything at the upper bound because 10 is that upper bound. I have an availability from 15 to 16. So let's do this. 15. That should be a string, but that's okay.
If you want, you can remove the quotes for now. If it's annoying.
Yeah, it's okay. It's just a habit of mine to do it like that.
Okay.
And then I would have an availability because now the OCD is gonna kick in if I don't do it every time. 17 to 18:30.
Okay.
Okay. So these are my list of available times from this schedule, and I think I mean, correct me if I did that wrong, but I'm pretty sure that is right for the available times that person 2 has.
For person
then
2, yeah.
What I should. Yeah, for person 2. So now what I want to do is compare this to person 1. So how do I do that? So this person has their bounds of 9 to 10. Oh, so what I think I should probably do is actually the same thing for person 2. And I'll already have a function that can do this for me. So that will actually mean I'm not going to be repeating really any logic. And actually now I'm going to go no quotes. So in this case, 9 to 10:30, I have a time from 10:30 to 12 available. And then I have a time from 13 to 16. And then I have a time from 18 to 20. So, sorry, I forget what. Oh, so the output is all the times that they could possibly have a meeting. Okay. So
all the available blocks of time. So it's not necessarily all the 30-minute increments. It's basically all the free blocks of time during which you could schedule a meeting.
Okay. So what I think now I need to do is say, okay, so my start time I have between 11:30 and 12:30. So now what I'm going to do is look at the end. Because now... All right, so I'm going to jump in here for 1 second. So if you guys can't already tell, what I'm focusing on really heavily right now is just trying to come up with some kind of solution and test it with some kind of input to make sure I'm on the right track before I actually go ahead and start coding. These problems, for me at least, are usually much easier to program than they are to understand. So I usually try to take as much time as I can at the beginning, even if that is, in this case, say 10 minutes, because I had 45 minutes from the start, to really digest the problem, understand it, and make sure I come up with some kind of thorough approach that I know is going to work before I start actually going ahead and coding. The last thing I want is to write all of the code and then get to the end of it, try some sample input on it, and have that code break. So right now, you can tell I'm kind of struggling a little bit. I've come up with a solution that's somewhat kind of working. I feel like I'm on a decent track to getting there, but I still don't know if this is going to be the exact right answer. So of course, I wish I could think faster and just immediately come up with the solution, but we're 10 minutes in. I'm kind of on one route right now. You'll see in a second that Clem kind of redirects me almost, but let's have a look at what I do now. Just wanted to clarify kind of why I'm taking so much time at the beginning and not even writing any code. I got to figure out what time. So there's an availability here from 10:30 to 12:30. So maybe what I can do is say if 11:30 is in between these two blocks, and I have half an hour between this end time. See, now I'm kind of confusing myself a bit, because now I got to get all the available blocks, not just the 30-minute intervals. Okay. Sorry, just give me 1 sec to think.
Yeah, no problem. No problem.
Yeah. Okay. 11:30. So 11:30 is the earliest possible time I could have a meeting. And then if the earliest possible time is 10:30 and it goes to 12, then I guess I could have a meeting from 10:30 to 12. So what I'm thinking is find the beginning time here. Okay, because what I'm where I'm getting hung up here is like, what if I had something like 11, because I guess I could have this like 11:58.
Yeah.
Technically, this wouldn't be enough time to have a meeting, right?
Yep.
So what I would do then, I guess, is just strictly remove that, because I can't have a meeting within that block of time. So if I can do that first, so essentially remove any blocks of time that are less than half an hour, then that's going to help me a little bit more towards the final solution. So let's say that's another step. So we're going to start by building all of the blocks of available time that either person could have.
Yeah.
And then what I'm going to do is remove any blocks that are invalid. So if it's less than half an hour in between, then get rid of them, because there's no point. We can't book a meeting in that, or half an hour for this example, but whatever that time is.
Okay.
And this will be in minutes, right? So this would be
30. So 30 would represent 30 minutes. If it were 1 hour, it would be 60.
Okay.
Could be 90 minutes,
and then
etc.
Okay. All right. So once I remove that, then what I need to do is say, okay, so I have a block from 10:30 to 12. So now I'll look at this first block, because these will be still in sorted order based on just the property of when I'm adding them in. And I'll say if 15 is in between these two blocks, let's check if we can do a meeting. Okay, it's not in between these two blocks, so let's move to the next block. Okay, so 15 is in between this next block. I know that I have enough time in here to do a 30-minute meeting, because I know that this is a valid range. So now I check, since 15 is in between these two blocks of time, if there's half an hour to the end time, or whatever that time is. So here I'll find 15, then I'll compare it to the end time, and I'll figure out what the difference between those two are. If that is greater than half an hour, then what I'll simply do is go 15 to the end time, I think. Yeah, and that looks like that works based on this. 15 to the end time if the end time is greater than half an hour, because at any point in there I could book a meeting.
But as an example,
now,
a quick question. Yeah. Sorry to cut you off.
Sure.
Imagine that here you had a bunch of other availabilities basically here from like person 2. Let's suppose that this was person 2. You had something like 12:30 to to 14, or rather, let's say you start over from the beginning. Let's say you had 7 to 8, then you had 9 to 10, then you had 11 to noon, and so on and so forth. How would you know that this 15 to 16 here sort of corresponds or can be kind of merged into this 13 to 16?
Okay, so the reason I'm saying that is because the 15 is in between these two numbers. So in this instance, when I have 11, 12, well, obviously 15 isn't in between those two numbers, so I know I can't book anything in here, because 15 is greater than the end time, right?
Okay.
So if it's in between these two values, which and I think that's like a valid comparison, just to check, if it's less than whatever. Then if it's in between the two values, which it is here, I can look at the end time specifically and figure out the difference between my start time and this end time. Then what I can actually do, I think, is take the minimum of whatever the end time is here and whatever the end time is here, and that is a valid block to book a meeting in. And then I've eliminated now from this list this block here. I've figured out that I can have a meeting based on this time from, I guess, 15 to 16. So now I can move to my next block, which is 17 to 8:30.
Okay.
So now that I'm at, does that like answer your question? What I was saying there?
Yep.
Okay, great. So now that I'm at 17 and 8:30, what I'll do is I'll figure out if 17 is in between any of these values. So now I know that the last one was in between here. So I can actually just start looking from here, right? Because I know this is sorted, so I don't even need to bother looking at the rest of the list, but that's kind of an optimization technique that I will focus more on later. So I'll start looking here. I'll say 17 is not in between these two numbers, but 17 is in between 18 and 17 is not in between 18 and 20. Okay, so that's where that falls apart if I'm just looking at the start time. Okay, so 17, 18. So if I just look at the start time, that doesn't work. I need to look at, I think maybe the start time and the end time and see if they're in between those two values, because if the end time is in between the two values, which in this case is 1830,
So Tim, let's take a quick step back, because I think that you're on the right track here. You have the idea, but now you're at this step of having to kind of figure out where you can kind of merge these availabilities, right? So
exactly, yeah.
If we take a step back, the first thing that you did, you even said that you would have this reusable function, is you transformed for each person, you transformed their calendar into a new calendar of blocks of time when the person is available, right?
Yes.
Like these times here represent chunks of time where the person is available. And you filtered these and you said remove any chunk of time that's less than our meeting duration, correct?
Exactly, yes.
So basically, what you did is you almost answered the question, but just for one calendar in the first step.
Exactly.
Right, okay. Yeah. So now let's see if we could simplify the approach that you're going with, which I think could work, but you might have a little bit more complication when you're trying to merge the things. Imagine you could have, instead of at the beginning, when you took a calendar, like you took this calendar of unavailabilities, right, or of meetings, and you calculated the in-betweens, right? You took the things in between, and these were your availabilities, and then you filtered them. Imagine you had, in this calendar, you had a mixture of both calendars. So you basically, you do the opposite of what you did. Instead of first finding the availabilities, imagine you had first merged both of these meetings, or both of these calendars, rather. You merged both of them when you have the meetings. You kind of, you mix them such that you have all of the blocks of time when one or both of the individuals are unavailable, right? One or both are unavailable, and then you do your step of calculating the in-betweens, which at that point essentially gives you the answer. Does that make sense?
Okay, I know exactly what you're saying. So, all right, so I'm going to take a pause there quickly. So you can see Clement gave me a pretty big hint there. Now, a lot of people will say that's cheating or, you shouldn't do that. I can say from experience doing my coding interviews, a lot of the time what I'm able to get the person to do, and this isn't just me trying to be, sneaky and strategic, is I'm able to get them to give me a hint because I talk about everything that I'm thinking about. So notice here that even though I'm kind of on the right track and the approach that I'm doing would potentially work, it'd just be a really difficult implementation to do. Clement heard my entire thought process. He knows that I'm kind of on the right track, and he figures that it's going to be easier if he simply tells me to merge the two calendars and then continue doing what I'm going to do. So just kind of a piece of advice that when you're in these coding interviews, talk about literally everything. Because even if you're completely wrong or you're like somewhat on the right track, your interviewer may be nice. They may be kind of rooting for you because they think you're going to be able to get it, and they'll give you a hint like Clement did. And like I said, almost all my interviews that I did, not necessarily that I needed a hint. I probably could solve it without the hint, but they gave me a hint and it made it a lot easier to continue going. And they wanted to give the hint, if that made any sense, just because of the way that I was explaining. Anyways, we'll jump back in here. You'll see that I'm about to kind of go down the correct path, but think to yourself right now, there's one thing that I haven't done that I don't do this entire interview with the input that would make it a lot easier. See if you can figure out what that is. What you're saying. So you're saying I'm doing this 2 times and then trying to merge. Why don't I just make one big list, do it once, and then I don't need to even bother with this merge step, which is obviously going to be very complicated based on what I've been talking about.
Perhaps.
Okay, yeah, perhaps. So I'm thinking if I can actually, I want to write like a merged version of this. So I need to merge them in sorted order. So to do that, I can do, it's almost like you would do it in merge sort, right? Where I'm going to just insert this one, then I'll check, in here, if I can insert it. If I can, I'll insert it. Then we'll go to the next one. Then we'll insert. So I know how to do that. So I can insert this in sorted order. So now if I have one that's in sorted order, then I can calculate the in-between times. Then I can filter. And then whatever blocks of time I have in my in my filtered list are the times that they should be available. I think that makes sense. I just want to write these as one.
If you want to write that merged thing that you just mentioned.
Yeah. Because I think that makes sense, but I got to visualize this first to be able to figure it out, right? Because so now it gets a little bit complicated just because this goes from 9 to 10:30 and then this is 10 to 11:30, right? So that's to merge them is going to be a bit of a different process than what I had come up with before. But we will sort them by start times. Okay, so let's go 16, 18. And by the way, sorry, how much time do I have left on the thing?
You still have 25 minutes, and don't worry about it for now. Just you're doing good.
Okay, yeah. Okay, great. I just really want to understand the problem before I start doing a mess of code, right?
Yep.
Okay. So what I think now that I have these together, now I got to come up with a better way to figure out which blocks of time are available, because there will be some overlaps in some of the times, whereas in the other ones there wouldn't have been overlaps, so that would have been easier. So here, we start at 9, we go to 10:30. So what I can do is actually look at, so I'll say 10:30 is my end time, my next start time is 10. So what I'll actually do is make this the next start time if this start time is less than the end time. Then that way I know I'll have the availability from 10:30. Actually 10. So yeah, so if I could say I could change this to be 10:30, then that makes it a little bit easier, because then now I know from 11:30 to 12 is fine. And then, okay, so this is greater than this. So if I could change this to be 13, this should be giving me valid. I'm just going to change it to make sure it makes sense.
And here, Tim, I would almost argue, do you even need to do that? Or can you even just somehow
I don't
delete this?
I don't need to and just merge the two times together. That's exactly. That would probably make more sense. So essentially, if I could go back to what I had, so if I have this, if this time is greater than this time, then merge these two entries. So I think that'll be my first step in the process. So then we now have this new list. So now this is my last end time. This is my newest start time. So now I have from here to here, since this entry is less than this, I'll check if this block of time is the amount of allotted time we need. And if it is, I can add that into this output. Next, we go from 12 to 13. And then since these times are the same, I can merge them. So I can go like that. And now what I can do is now look, since these times are the same, I can merge them again. Okay, so let's merge them like that. And now, okay, so this is less than this. So is it more than half an hour? It is. Okay, so let's add 15 and 16 to our output. Okay, now let's look at 18, 16. Oh, this is greater than this one. So what can I do? I can merge them. Okay, and I get 18, 17. And now what I need to do, actually, sorry, like this, 18. So that, okay, so this is where it's a little bit confusing for me, is because these are the same start times, and then this end time is actually greater than this end time, right? So since this is greater than this, I need to check if this is greater than the end time too. Because if it's greater than the other end time, then I would take the max, obviously.
Would you take the max or the min?
Well, if I'm available from, if I'm not this is a list of my non-available times.
This is when one of the two people is booked.
Yeah, so this is when they're booked. So if I'm booked from 16 to 18, well then this isn't really even relevant, because I'm booked from 16 to 18, which means I'd be booked from 16 to 17 anyway. So I would take the max.
Yep. Okay.
I would definitely take the max. Okay. Sorry, you just confused me a little bit with that. That's okay.
I totally didn't just get confused myself.
Okay.
All right, you're good.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I was taking a sip of water. Now, what I will do is look at the bounds that I have. So what I can do with the bounds is simply take the min of whatever these bounds are. So in this case, I'll take, I need to take the max on the, yeah, well, it'll be the max on the left side, the min on the right side. I think that makes sense. Yeah, so max on left side, min on right side. So in this case, this would be the bounds I want to look at, 10 to 830. And then I could just see, then I need to look at the first entry in my list. And I actually need to merge that again. So these bounds now are getting me a little bit tricky as well. So if I have and I do like 10 like that, I think what I can actually do is just compare 10 to whatever this first start time is.
Yep.
And then I can just change this almost to be just 10. But if, for example, this said 9:30, then I would just need to scrap this whole thing. So actually, what I think I could do is probably just compare all these blocks of times to whatever the bounds that I have. And if they don't fall within the bounds, I'll modify them or remove them.
And for now, let's actually just keep the bounds even aside, because I think I understand where you're getting at. But let's even forget about the bounds for a second. Let's not complicate ourselves.
Yeah. Okay. So I think maybe now is probably actually a decent time to start writing something. All right, so I'll take a break here quickly. So you can see that now we're probably, like 25, 26 minutes in, something like that, and I'm just about to start coding. So usually I would be a little bit nervous in this situation because I don't want to take half the time to digest the problem. If that's necessary, obviously I'm going to do that like I did here. As you guys can tell, I was confusing myself, like there's a lot of different input and time stuff going on the screen here, but I think at this point I kind of have a clear idea of what I want to do. Obviously, Clement has helped a little bit, but again, the reason he's able to help me is because I'm constantly talking out loud. And even if I'm thinking something that's incorrect, I'm still saying it just to kind of see how he reacts to it and see if, because he knows the answer to the problem, if I am on the right track. So there is a little bit of kind of confirming with your interviewer that they understand where your head's at, and they're not going to let you kind of jump into the code and do something horribly wrong. So at least you have the opportunity to kind of get checked a little bit and say, okay, am I on the right path? Yes, I am. Okay, let's keep going. So anyways, I'll jump back in here, but now I'm about to start coding. And again, think about that thing that I should have done to the input that I haven't done and that I'm not going to end up doing in this interview that would make things a lot easier for me when it comes to comparing these different values, which is like the main step of all of the processes I've talked about to start writing something. So I will run through this one more time just to make sure that I'm refreshed. What I'm going to do is insert in sorted order into a large list, both the availability or the busy times of person 1 and of person 2.
Yep.
I'm going to ignore these bounds for now because those we'll talk about later, I guess. And then what I'm going to do is do those comparisons that I talked about. So I'm going to compare, I'm going to compare the end time to this end time. And I'm going to say, okay, well, if this is greater than this, I'll merge them together. But if this end time in the other list is less than the end time here, I can actually just remove this entry altogether.
Right.
Because that'll just give me, because I'll be busy during that time.
Yep.
Then I'll do the same thing for the next one. So I'll look at 12 to 13. Oh, this will be a big list, so we'll do that all together. And then when I get to the end of that, what I can do is literally just compare what I talked about before, the end time to the next start time. If there's enough time there, I'll add that to the output.
Yep.
Same thing here, right? If there's enough time here, I'll add that to the output. Okay, so let's start doing this. Okay, and again, the capitals here are going to be weird.
Don't worry.
Google Docs. So define.
Don't worry about the capitals. Yeah, don't worry about the auto caps and all that.
Define. Is there a name for this? Well, calendar. I'll just call it a veil for now.
Sure, that's fine.
Okay, calendar veil. I'll ignore the bounds for now in my input. We can change them later. So I'll say person 1 schedule, person 2 schedule. And then what else do I need? I need time. So we'll do that. And I'm going to write this in Python, so time is actually fine as a keyword. Yep. Okay, so now what I need to do is I need to insert these into sorted order. So that means I need to make a list. So I'm going to say...
And by the way, feel free to simplify the variables if it's too annoying to type out. Up to you.
Okay, there we go. We'll do that. So, and yeah, just for case sense. Okay, so book time. So quick side note, whenever I make variables, just kind of a tip I've heard is to make them really readable. Not only does that make it easier for myself when I go back, I can see what I'm doing with all of these variables, but Clement can also understand what I'm trying to do with those. So typically it's good to have variable names that are pretty descriptive, but obviously in this situation, I'm kind of running low in time. I probably only have about 20 minutes left before this interview is actually going to be done. So obviously in the name of time, it probably does make sense to simplify these a little bit, but we'll see how stubborn we are with that, and if I end up actually, simplifying all these variable names. Just for case sense. Okay, so book times. So now I need to get into the issue of how am I going to compare these string numbers. So I almost want to make a function just to compare these to tell me, I'm going to do it like I would actually do it in Java and get like the 1, -1, 0 based on if it's greater than or less than for comparison. So I'm going to say define compare times. I'm going to say time 1, time 2. Now we need to get our hours and we need to get our minutes. So I'm going to say hour 1 equals, and in this case it's going to be time 1 dot split colon, and I think I can actually do hour 1 minute 1 is going to be time 1 dot split. That should actually decompose that because I know and I'm guaranteed that I'm going to have these 0 zeros. And will I have yeah, so that should be fine because I can split at the colon.
Yeah, and you can assume that these strings are going to be in such a way that your math here is correct and you don't need to do fancy edge case handling or anything.
Okay, good, because that was going to make it a lot more complicated for not even really part of the problem. Okay, so now we'll have hour 1, minute 1, so we can start by saying if, and actually I could literally just convert these to minutes and then do the comparison, so I could just do hour 1 times 60 plus, okay, so let's actually do that. It's going to be hour 1. All right, so here I've given away what I should have just done to the entire input. So you can see I'm writing this kind of complicated function that's going to compare, string times and return a 1 if it's greater, 0 if they're the same, and -1 if they're different. When in reality, rather than having to even write this compare times function, what I could have done is just converted the entire input into minutes, and then that way it would have been way easier for me to do everything you're about to see. But of course, I didn't consider that when I was in this problem. I definitely should have. But you'll see that if it was in minutes, that immediately makes this problem so much easier, and that's something that I just didn't end up doing. It's going to be hour 1, minute 1. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so we're going to just say time 1. I'm going to change that to my initial variable is going to be int hour 1 multiplied by 60 plus minute 1. And then time 2 equals int, and that should be actually an int as well. Minute 1, and we'll say int hour 2 times 60 plus int minute 2, and do a quick check here. I think that should hopefully just give me kind of the amount of time in minutes, because 18 times 60, since it's 24-hour time, that should be right, plus int minute. Yeah, I think that's right. Sure. And then what I'm going to say is if time 1 is greater than time 2, return 1. 1 will stand for greater than, and then we'll say elif time 1 is less than time 2, return this will be -1, which will be less than, and then else return 0, which will mean that it's the same. So I'm just kind of stealing that from the compare to method in Java that they usually use. So we'll just say this will be same. Okay, and now what I need is to create this kind of schedule thing. So how do I insert these times in sorted order? Well, I'm going to have to use those comparisons. Okay, so we'll start by just comparing the start times, I guess, and just inserting essentially what the earliest start times are into our list. So I'm just going to say I'm going to say P1, which is just going to stand for pointer 1, and P2 be 0, 0. I'm going to say while P1 is less than the length of P1. And I'm actually just going to make it P1S. I know this is like not the best way to name them, but it's just going to save me a bit of time because I think I'm running a bit low. Yep. While P1 time is less than that, or P2 is less than the len of P2S. We're going to say if, in this case, P1S at pointer 1 start time, which will be 0.
Yep.
So we're going to have to say if compare times p1s and then p2s at pointer 2, 0. So that should actually compare our time. So if that equals 1, which is actually, we're going to say -1, this will mean that we are less than, so p1 less than p2.
Yep.
So then we'll insert that into our book times. So we'll say booked underscore times dot append, and then this should be p1s p1. I hate reading this, but that's okay. And then we'll say p1 plus equals 1. So p1 plus equals 1. So that should increment our pointers. So p1, I think that actually will work. And then we'll say otherwise. Then we can just insert the other one. So we say booked underscore times dot append. And if they're the same, we're just going to default to insert the other one, I guess.
Fair enough.
Which is fine. So we'll say p times dot append p2s p2. So quick note here that it probably would have been easier if I simply put like p1 time, p2 time as variables. Notice here that I have like p1s, p1 at index 0, and then I'm writing like all of these indexes multiple times. So, usually it's better to throw those into a variable. It just makes it cleaner, and that's typically better, coding practice. Anyways, we'll continue. And then p2 plus equals 1. Okay, so after this is done, assuming I didn't make any mistakes, then this should actually give me that sorted list. Now, I'm kind of doing this the way that you do it, like in merge sort, where you just compare, like, this one to this one, and then, our next pointer's up at this one if we insert this first one, and then I compare this one to this one, then I insert this, then my next pointer's here, then I compare it to this one, I insert that, my next pointer's here, compare this one to this one, insert that. So I think you're following me with that, right? That makes sense?
Yep.
So, did you guys catch the bug? You can pause it and try to find it. I can tell you right now that if you have a look at this OR, that will probably give it away to you. Essentially, what's going to happen here is I needed to actually throw in a clause in this while statement that says, if P1 reaches the maximum length, then just add all the values from P2. If P2 reaches the maximum length, like the pointer, then add all the values from P1. I'm not sure if I do that afterwards, so we'll actually see if that happens. But if I put an and instead of the or, then that means that I will end up adding all of them, assuming I add that kind of like clause in the while statement or that condition in the while statement. Anyways, I hope that makes sense, but see if you can catch that bug. Okay, so now that we have that, now it's time to do that kind of parsing through with which is going to be a little bit more complicated, like we talked about before. So I'm going to say I'll just do for I in range the len of booked underscore times. Okay.
By the way, you still have 12 minutes, so you're good on time.
Okay, great. So for I in range the len of booked times, but while we're up here, we're gonna say, I'm just gonna call this available. You know what? I feel like I'm gonna spell that wrong, so let's just call this output.
Okay.
Equals that, so we can store our stuff in there. For I in range the len of booked times. Now I want to go through my thing one more time. So essentially what I'm going to do is compare the ending time of entry 1 to the start time of entry 2. If this time is greater than this, then we can mush them together. But if this time here is if this time here is actually less than the other time, then I can straight up just remove this entire entry.
Okay.
I think that makes sense. Okay, so I'm still debating whether or not that's perfect, but I think that's okay. So for I, len of book time, since we're going to compare it to the one above, but I could actually technically be removing stuff. So I almost just want to say, do a while loop. Because if I'm going to be removing stuff from the list that I'm looping in, that's going to cause issues. So I almost want to use a while loop instead. And then if I remove something, just leave the pointer at whatever the index it was at before. So let's do that. I'm actually gonna say I.
Do you need to mutate this booked times list, or can you mutate maybe the output list? I mean, up to you. Whatever you feel more comfortable writing.
Yeah. I don't think I need to I definitely don't need to mutate the booked times list, but kind of the way I'm thinking about it right now, I don't have like a better idea
for
how to not mutate it. Although I think actually like I can probably come up with the output in this in one loop while I'm looping through. I don't think I actually need to even change this or do another loop, which is kind of what I was planning to do, but I might confuse myself a bit while I'm coding that.
In the interest of time, I would probably go with, well, there are two arguments here, but I would probably go with what's least confusing to you.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to say I equals 0, while I is less than the len of, and this len will update every time, so that should be good. The len of booked underscore times. I'm going to say now I need to compare the end time of entry whatever to the next entry, which actually means that this should be a -1 here. Okay, so now we're going to say start 1, or actually end, I'll just say end 1 equals, in this case, booked underscore times I 1, and then we'll say start 2 equals booked underscore times I 0. Now what we need to do is say if end 1 is greater than, now I need to use my compare times method.
Yep.
If compare times end 1 start 2, I gotta remember what I wanted to do there. So if the end here is greater than the start here, I need to modify the list. Otherwise, I think I can actually just look at the distance between this and the start time and figure out what that should be. Okay, so if this time is 1, so that essentially means if the end of my other one is greater than the start of my other one, now what I want to do is figure out what the end of the other one was. So I'm going to say end2 equals, in this case, booked underscore times. This should be, and this needs to be I plus 1.
Okay.
That on that.
Yep.
I plus 1, and this needs to be 1. Now I want to figure out what I should do here. Actually, I don't even think, I think I could just like skip to the next entry if it's the case that the other end is greater. Yeah, so if I'm looking here and I do, let's find an example here. Like, I'm kind of mad that I've got rid of my example. If I did like 15, what is it, 17? Yeah, so if this is greater than this,
yeah,
but this is greater than this one, then what I need to do is put 18 here. But if this is, say, 1630, then what I can do is literally just skip over this entry, I think, because there will be no availability in that time. So I should go I plus 2 maybe. I think that works if I just skip past that. I plus equals 2 rather than I plus equals 1, because if the end time is greater, so if compare times, and in this case end2, in this case, I guess go end1 equals 1, so that should mean that the end time of the other one is greater than this end time. Then I could skip over it.
Yep.
Otherwise, so if the compare times actually, so if it isn't the case that I have that edge case, so let's say we have the example here, 1130, 1230, because that'll be what I get into the else statement. Then what I can do is calculate the difference in time. If that is greater than whatever that value is that passed to me, I can just send that into the output list, as that should be an answer, because I should be able to book a time between that end time and between the next start time. I think that's logical. So otherwise, so now I actually need to figure out the difference in times. I'm just gonna write like a pseudo function that says like difference in time, and like I can code it later if I have time. I'll say if diff in time, and we'll go between end 1 start 2 is greater than or equal to, what did I call that variable?
But here, Tim, by doing this, I get that you're kind of like trying to skip ahead here and basically get an answer right off the bat. But in the case above here, you won't have done this. So will you not basically be, like, by doing by trying to get the answer immediately in this else, will you not be sometimes skipping getting the answer when you're in this situation?
But I think the thing here is if I'm in, oh yeah, because you're right, because I'm going to skip over 2. So maybe I just won't even bother doing this, and I'll just do the, yeah, so I do actually need to mutate the list then, I guess, from what I was doing, because I was trying to go back to the other approach, but I guess I'll just mutate the list. So rather than skipping over 1, what I'll do is just remove the next entry in this instance and then merge the times. Otherwise, I'll do something else. So we'll say else. Then what I need to do is literally say, in this case, I can just remove that next entry. So I could say booked underscore times dot remove, actually dot pop. This is going to be I plus 1, because I don't need that entry. Otherwise, then I'll merge the start time and in the end time. So I can actually just say booked underscore times I 1 equals and 2. Yes. Okay. So now I've done this. Assuming this is right, I've generated a list, and now what I can do is literally just do the blocks in between and then add them to the output. Assuming that's right. Again, not 100%, but I think it's okay. So now we'll just loop through again. And I need to make sure I increment I, otherwise that's not going to be very good, is it? I plus equals 1. I think that's fine, because if I remove the entry, then I shouldn't increment I. But if I don't remove the entry, then I should. And I should...
And sorry, here, Tim.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Can you hear me? Let me just pause the timer 1 second. Are you still typing in the doc?
Yeah.
Okay, okay. I'm restarting the timer because it had just freaked out on my end, but now I see it. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, no worries. I just got a reconnecting, but I have all the recording on my OBS anyway,
perfect.
So it's fine.
Yep.
Okay. So actually what I've just done, sorry, in case you missed that, is I did I minus 1, I plus 1, because now what I'm going to do is if I pop the entry, I need to stay on whatever that current entry is to compare to the next one, because I've just removed it.
Okay.
But otherwise, I'll increment my counter I plus 1 so that I can move to the next one and then start doing that. Since this is getting long, I'm going to go down onto the next page.
Sure.
Okay. And now we'll do this next while loop where I'm going to do that comparison thing that I just wanted to pop in here quickly and say, I hope you guys can appreciate how difficult it is to code in Google Docs with like the auto indentation tab issues, with like the auto complete capitals. That was really throwing me off. But anyways, just wanted to note that this is a lot more difficult than say writing on the whiteboard. I've done both, and writing on a whiteboard is way easier than this. Comparison thing that I talked about before, like the difference in between. So I'll say, wow, and I guess we're going to go I equals 0 again. Or I could probably just do a for loop, to be honest. I don't think I need to do a while loop. Say for I in range booked underscore times.
What are you doing in this final for loop?
This final for loop, what I'm going to do is figure out the output. So essentially the difference between the end time and the start time of the next entry.
Gotcha.
And then if that time is enough, I will simply add that block, so the start time and the end time of the other entry, to the output list, and then that should be good. So I need to do -1 there because when I compare to the last element, I have I plus 1. I don't want to have an index error.
Okay.
So I'm going to say if, in this case, diff between, and we're just going to assume that I've written this function, but for now I have not, equals 1. So actually, sorry, is greater than or equal to not 30 time. So if the difference between, this is going to be, let's go just to make this a little bit cleaner, end 1 is going to be equal to booked underscore times I 1.
Yep.
And start 2 is going to be equal to booked underscore time I plus 1 0.
Yep.
So in that instance, we can say if the difference between start end 1 start 2, and we'll assume this gives us an absolute value difference, that's not going to be negative.
Yep.
Then what we'll say is add that block, otherwise don't even bother. Okay, so then we'll say output dot append, and in this case we should just do end 1 start 2, and then return output. Now I'm like almost 100% sure that this probably doesn't work just because I think I've confused myself a lot throughout like what I was doing here, but the logic for my solution I think makes sense, but I don't think this code will be 100%. Just I feel like I should say that.
Do you mind running me through the complexity analysis?
Yeah. Oh, sure. The complexity analysis. Okay. So in this instance, we're gonna run this loop will run. I guess it's gonna be O n plus m, where we're gonna have nbp1s and nbp2s.
Yep.
Then for this time, this booked list will be the same thing. So this will be O n plus m. I minus 1, skip it. All right, so I will quickly pause here before I let myself continue with the complexity analysis here. You can see I've just gone over time, and clearly this problem was, more difficult than I've been used to. I spent a lot of time at the beginning trying to understand exactly what I needed to do, and of course, that left me with just the amount of time to kind of scrape by with a solution that, as I've noted myself, probably won't fully be functioning, but the general kind of idea behind it is somewhat correct. Anyways, I'll let myself continue with the complexity analysis, but Clement is nice enough to give me an extra, I think we have like 5 minutes or something to go through the complexity analysis. I'm not sure if I make a fix or not, so we'll see if that happens. But remember, there is one big bug in this program that happened at the very beginning that I think I already went through. Skip it. No, that's fine. So this will be O(n) plus m. And then for this last one, this will be O(n) plus m again as max. So this should be an O(n) plus m complexity, unless I'm missing something. The compare times, that this will run constant time. My difference between will run constant time. I don't think I've done any interior loops inside. Book times that append. Actually, the pop here, sorry, where's my pop? Because I know that pop will not run in constant time. This pop here, I'm pretty sure will run in O(n). So I could actually have O(n) squared m, because this pop I'm pretty sure doesn't run in constant time. I don't know, but since it's a list and it has to potentially move something, it would have to potentially shift every element in the list over depending on where I pop from.
Yeah,
that could be n. My average case I think is still going to be n plus m, but worst case would be n squared plus m. So that would make the overall time complexity n squared plus m, including this pop. But pop usually is a pretty fast operation implemented in Python, so that should give me average time n plus m. I think that's right.
Okay.
Space complexity, and just another pop in here. I'm pretty certain that pop runs in O(n). Of course, I could go through this in more detail and discuss when I'm popping and how many elements I would potentially be shifting, but the reason I'm classifying that as big O of n is because technically if I pop the first element of a list, the entire rest of the list I would need to shift into that position, so that would run in O(n) time. If you understand time complexity, you probably understand what I'm getting at, but of course I wanted to make that clear in the interview. Space complexity, I'm going to have n plus m, and then output will be, so I guess that's constant, so n plus m.
Okay. So, yeah, I think we just ran out of time. Sometimes, interviewers will go a little bit over time, so maybe I would ask you, very quickly, how confident you feel about your code, but you sort of told me.
Yeah.
If you want, let's spend actually, 2 more minutes going over the code, and then we will get into the debrief and sort of end the interview. But
Sure.
Out of curiosity, if you very briefly walk through the code, do you see any place where you think you have a bug?
For sure. Okay, so my first main piece of logic, I'm fairly confident in, although I would like to debug it a bit to obviously make sure. This is just going to essentially build that sorted list of all the times that both people are booked. So the way this logic works is essentially the same way that merge sort works. So what I'm going to do is compare the entry in my first list at pointer 1 to the entry in my second list at pointer 2. And then based on whatever that is, so if my pointer 1 in my first list is less than the pointer 2 in the next list, I'll append that in. Otherwise, I'll append the other one. So this one should technically build that sorted list. Since I have these 2 pointers, I won't add the same element twice, because what I'll end up doing is once I get to the end of list 1, then this will always be greater than the other one, so it'll always add until we get to pointer 2, and then this, I think this condition works fine. If that makes sense.
I think I understand what you mean. I guess here I think you would probably have to add something to your compare times to handle that, because what you just said about this, once you reach the end of one of the lists, this will always be bigger or something.
Yeah.
Not really, because you will eventually, one of the lists will finish, so to speak, before the other one, and your condition will still run. So you'll be accessing values past the list.
No, I won't, because I won't increment this pointer unless this specific condition is true. So what will end up happening is if I insert this because it's, if I insert that because it's less than, okay, you actually are correct. Yeah, I'd have to do something like, I don't know why I thought that was going to work. If pointer 1 is, greater than, or I guess is equal to the len of P1S minus 1, then I would just add pointer 2. And then same thing with the other way around.
Yep, something like that.
You know what I'm saying that? Okay.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah, something like that. Okay, so that's a good bug to catch. I was kind of speeding through this one. Okay, so now this piece of logic here is essentially trying to kind of mutate that list to find the blocks that we can use for the next part of logic, which I'll talk about. So what this one is going to do is compare the start time and the end time of the blocks that are beside each other, because we know that they're sorted. So what that will allow me to do is essentially, I'm going to create the largest blocks of time that I can that are beside each other, if that makes sense. So like say I have 9 to like 12:30 and this is 12 to 7, then that would be 9 to 17 o'clock, right? That's what that's doing, or at least I'm trying to do in this block of code. So I'm comparing the times. If the end time is greater than the start time of the other one, then what I'll do is compare the end times.
Yep.
If the end time of the other one, so the one further right in the list, is less than the end time, so actually I think that needs to be,
because here you compared N2 to N1. So here
I realized I think I did that backwards. So
if N2 is less than N1, then you are popping the value, the next value. You are decrementing.
That makes sense.
You're decrementing I, and then you still increment it after to basically like keep moving forward.
Exactly.
I see what you mean.
Yeah, and then here this is just mutating that list, so it's moving the N2 over. Okay, so so that -1 was needed to there. That's what happens when I guess you speed through. Okay.
That last part I think is fine. Let's jump into the debrief. Why don't you start by telling me like how you feel right now?
Yeah. All right. So we're at the debrief section. I will let myself continue here. It's funny, I'm interrupting myself. But as you can see there, we kind of went through it at the end. Usually what I would do if I had adequate time is before I, say, I feel confident, I feel like the solution is good, I would do what I just did. I would walk through the entire code. I would try, a test example on it and make sure that it's actually functioning properly. Obviously, in this situation, I didn't have enough time where I could actually run through a sample input and make sure my code would perform, but that's usually what I always do whenever I finish these coding questions. Again, in this situation, I was kind of running low on time, so it was a big rush at the end, and I can kind of credit some of these, silly mistakes to the fact that I was rushing. Anyways, I guess I will let myself tell you guys how I felt.
You feel right now.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, guys, like you can probably tell based on kind of my mood and what we're going through, I don't feel great about this solution. This problem was challenging for me to kind of comprehend, just because even like this string input was like, there was a lot of stuff that was just like a lot of details to deal with at once. Like I kind of confused myself a little bit as I went through the different paths. I'm happy I came up with a logical solution that makes sense. I think the time complexity is actually pretty decent. I didn't do anything too crazy with, I mean, I have this n squared, but that's just because of that pop, but I didn't do anything too crazy with the complexity, so that's okay. I felt I explained my logic pretty well. I asked decent clarifying questions, but like just, you gave me a little bit of hints for the solution. I think maybe if I had more time, or if I had done a little bit more prep on something maybe this difficult, I would have been able to come up with it a little bit faster and a little bit cleaner. You kind of get my like vibe from that.
Yeah. So listen, I'll give you my input. I think you did really well. I think your assessment is probably how I would feel if I were you. Like, you're kind of like, I feel like I sort of got it, but at the same time, it's like not, it's not picture perfect. But what you should take away from this, because again, from my point of view, you actually did very well. Okay. I would have to, take a little bit of time to grade you, so to speak, following the actual criteria that we're given. But you would probably get something along the lines of a higher or a strong higher decision here, at least from me, based on what I'm seeing. Yeah. The main reason is this. First of all, this is a very difficult question. This is actually a question that we have on Algo Expert. I know for a fact that you didn't do it based on the questions you told me you did do. But so this is a very hard question on Algo Expert. The reason that it's very hard is exactly what you said. First of all, there's a lot of information. There are a lot of inputs. Yeah. There's a lot of different types of inputs. You saw that they're strings, they're not numbers, they're military time. You have these daily bounds, which, by the way, the daily bounds, you can simplify the problem by just creating artificial meetings at the beginning and end of each person's calendar using the daily bounds, if that makes sense. That's
kind of what I figured, yeah. That's what I figured out. That's kind of what I was trying to figure out at the beginning, and then I was running low on time, and then that was just another piece, so we just skipped by it. But yeah, I did kind of think of that.
Exactly. But even that, it's an additional piece of just complicatedness or complexity. And then the thing that's difficult about this problem is not so much the algorithm, because the algorithm or the logic is fairly intuitive. And I think you came up with a version at the very beginning that I think would have worked fine. I just pushed you in a slightly different direction that I think is a little bit simpler, but you were doing just the opposite order of operations. But then the coding is difficult.
Yes.
Transcribing this into code is difficult, and I think you did a very good job. Like you pointed out, the part of the code that's probably the most shaky is this middle part here with the popping.
Yeah.
And the fact that you're kind of overwriting this thing. And there's a way to do this without the popping that we don't need to get into here. But I think that you explained your logic soundly, and you managed to transcribe it into something that seems like it's getting close to working. Probably there are edge cases here that aren't handled, but it's getting close to working. You also did a good job of using helper functions and that kind of thing to your advantage, like compare times. Like this is the kind of thing where a must to do something along these lines. The diff between here, a must, absolute must. Otherwise, like you're going to get a gross algorithm. You did have a little bug in the merging, but that was you caught it near the end. And again, it's like this is the kind of problem where it would be a lot to ask to expect a candidate to code this entire solution perfectly in just 45 minutes, all the while solving it. So this is more than what I would expect, especially if you're going for an intern position where we don't necessarily have the same bar as, let's say, a senior position, full-time senior position. So yeah, overall, I think you did a good job.
Okay, well, I mean, that's great feedback. Definitely makes me feel a little bit better, because I was kind of thinking about, all right, so I'm going to cut myself off there. I know what happens at the end of this interview. It's not too interesting, but there you go. That's Clement's feedback for me. I mean, do you guys agree? Do you disagree? He's done a bunch of coding interviews with, like literally hundreds of people at Google, so I trust his word. And this was really great practice for me going into like my Microsoft interview and my Shopify interview, because I did not get questions that were this difficult. So like Clement said, this is a difficult question. Yes, some of you will probably look at this and say, oh, I could answer that this way, but I can guarantee you it is a lot more difficult when you're on a Google Docs. You can't see the guy's face because we were on like just a call where I had my earbuds in, and you're just going and trying to do it in 45 minutes. So anyways, that has kind of been the mock coding interview. Looking back at this now, I will give kind of a summary of my thoughts. I think that generally I did a decent job. I stuck with what I always try to do, which is explain myself as well as possible. And you saw the benefits that I gained from that. Clement gave me a few hints. I was able to catch some of the bugs. I was able to figure out the flaw in my own thinking simply because I was kind of speaking out loud. And I always find it's easier to have someone to kind of rebound ideas off of, because then you can very quickly determine based on, even just little things that they say, whether or not you're on the right track or not. In terms of things for improvement, I think definitely the coding was a little bit sloppy. Looking at it now, this wouldn't be the standard that I would hold myself to. I've just been coding longer, coding more in the industry. So I would have liked to see, some better variables, just things a little bit more split up, easier to read. I would have liked if I had converted the entire input into numbers first, or into minutes, sorry, so that I wouldn't have had to use, say, the compare times thing and deal with strings and all of that. But overall, decent interview. And, this is really good for me looking back to see kind of how far I've come and how I might approach this problem differently now. So anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed. If you have any questions, any comments about this, please do leave that down below. The original video, if you're looking for no cuts or if for some reason you want to see it, is on Clement's channel, which I will link down below. And with that being said, if you enjoyed, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and of course, I will see you guys again in another YouTube video.